Today I thought it'd be fun to just open up one of my models and give you a tour of it. This isn't really going to be a tutorial where I show you how to build something. I just kind of want to open up the model, kick the tires, show you how I have it set up, how I use the outliner to keep things organized. And then along the way, I'll talk about different workflow tips and different shortcuts that I used. So let's open up the file and take a look. This is a retail store that I built for this channel. It's not a real project, but it's pretty complete. Right now I have the 3D viewport maximized. It's in solid shading mode, but you can see there's no other information. That's because the overlays are off. If you go up to here, this button shows overlays. So if you hover over this, it shows overlays. Shift-Alt-Z. So that's gizmos and outlines and stuff. So Shift-Alt-Z, that's the shortcut. I use that a lot. Turn it on and off. Sometimes when you have a full scene and you're using material preview, you don't want to see all the different lights. And like in this case, you can see the reference drawings that I set up. Sometimes you just want to turn that all off. Control spacebar will exit the full screen view. I don't know what the name of that command is, but you can do that for any viewport. So if you're working on the shader editor and you have a material that you're working on, Control spacebar will maximize that temporarily, and Control spacebar exits that. So I'm going to zoom all the way out. I'm going to turn all of my collections off. The first thing I usually do is import the drawings. So here I have separate collections for the plan, elevations, and storefront. These were imported from an AutoCAD file. I have a video on that. I import them as a DXF file. They come in as curve objects, but these are actually mesh objects. So you can see I can actually select individual vertices and edges. I prefer doing that because you cannot snap to like a midpoint or an edge of a curve object, but you can do that for a mesh. So I typically enable vertex, edge, face, and edge center. And when I'm manipulating and arranging the CAD drawings, I like to be able to snap. But the CAD files, I arrange the elevations along the different walls that they correspond to so that you can have a framework, kind of a wireframe of the store. And then I use that to snap to and build the floor, extrude the walls, build the ceiling, and things like that. Another thing I like to do, typically this is not shown, but in the outliner, there's something called the filter in this top right corner. If you press the filter, there are different restriction toggles. So this includes viewport visibility, visibility of the camera, but this one, this little arrow is called selectability. If you turn that on and off, you have this new icon over here. If you turn this off, that means you can no longer select that object. So it's essentially locked in place. If you don't want to accidentally delete or move something in your scene, you can turn off its selectability. After I import the CAD files at an accurate scale, right? This is real world scale. First thing I usually do is build the ground. So in this case, the ground of the store is just a big rectangle. So it's a plane. It's not an actual box, but for the sake of visualization, you can simplify things and it's just a flat 2D plane. If you're doing something like a tile that has a thickness, you can extrude that and create a box and do like a beveled edge. But for me, this was a real simple store that just had a rectangular floor, so I kept it as a plane. If you're in a mall or something, this is like a neutral mall finish. The next thing I usually do is create the walls. In material preview, this is a PBR texture, right? These bricks look like they have some sense of depth, but it's actually just in the material. I usually model the walls by extruding a plane or a cube to align in plan so that it matches up. I'm going to isolate the plan using local view. Local view is usually the slash button. You can see the name right there, local view, that hides everything else and then zooms onto the objects that you've selected. I have this thing for shortcuts where I don't like moving my hand across the keyboard. So the slash button is on the right side of the keyboard. I usually try to keep my hand on the left side of the keyboard. So I've actually set up a custom shortcut to be Alt Q just for me because I don't like moving my hand. But Alt Q also does local view for me. But whenever I'm modeling something, just so I don't accidentally snap to something else, I usually isolate things so that I don't have the entire scene that I'm working on. So there I'm isolating the walls using local view. For openings, I like to use bridge faces. So let's, for instance, say I want to put an opening right here. I just beveled an edge, go into face selection mode, select the two faces on the outside and inside where I want to make an opening. If you right click and press B or go down to bridge faces, it'll pop an opening in your mesh. So I use that for windows and doors. The next thing I usually do is build the ceiling. So in this case, the ceiling had some structural beams that are visible. It's an open ceiling. And then I usually just take the floor and then duplicate it, press Z to lock movement along the Z axis. Control, I would usually snap to the elevation. And then you can see that it aligns exactly with my ceiling. If you want to give it a thickness, you can just tab into edit mode and extrude it. In this case, I think I extruded it 24 inches. So it's a 2 foot thick ceiling, but that's the ceiling. The next thing I usually do is lighting. So in this case, I have a separate layer for the track light fixtures. This is something I usually keep in my asset browser, and then I just drag it and drop it into the scene. And I usually like to use arrays for this, but for some reason I didn't. I don't use the asset browser as much as I should. You can see I have some really simple materials like black metal, concrete floor, bricks. You know, I should have a more robust collection of materials and assets that I use, but honestly, I don't really use it that much. And then I have the storefront. So the storefront is like, you know, the front face of your store. So I keep that on a separate collection. And most of the time I do that for reasons of isolating. So let's say I wanted to work on the storefront and do some minor edits to the geometry or the materials. If you right click a collection and press S, it will select it. So right click, you can see if you go to select objects, you can see the S is underlined. That means if you press S, it's going to choose this. So right click and find it on the menu, or, you know, a shortcut, right click S, it will automatically select that. And then I would isolate that in local view and then do whatever edits you need to unisolate to go back into the view. That's a big part of my 3D workflow, is working in local view. In this case, there's a paneling system on the wall. You can see that there's these 2-foot wide panels. In a retail space, you typically have like a wall system for displays. So I'm keeping that on one. The floor fixtures is tables and mirrors and T-stands and clothing displays. And since this was an apparel store, I actually have a separate collection for mannequins. The mannequins are interesting because these are actually linked models. You can see there's an empty object underneath each of these mannequins. So if I hit tab, I actually can't go into edit mode of this because this is a linked model. I can't change this model at all. I can scale it, I can rotate it, I can apply transforms, but this model itself is referencing a different Blender model. That's sometimes useful because this is a pretty high density mesh and it keeps the file size of your current scene down a little bit. But let's say, for instance, I wanted to change that. So I have a asset folder. Here I have something called male mannequins. That's the Blender file that these are pulled from. So you can see all the different seated mannequins and all the different standing mannequins are in this. So there's one with the hands behind the back, one with the hands together. So these are the linked files. These are actual meshes. So let's say, for instance, if I tab into edit mode, I select the guy's head and pull it up, right? So now his head is no longer connected. If I save this file, Control S to save the blend file, if I go back here, you would expect, since they're linked, that this could update. It's not going to update automatically. I wish you could do this, like right click and say upload or update, but under the outliner, if you go into this is display mode. If you go to Blender file, go all the way down to the bottom, there are linked. See the little chains? That's a chain link. It's a linked model. You can see male mannequins.blend is linked here. So if I right click it and go to reload, this model is going to update. I changed it over here in the original blend file, and in the linked file, if I reload it, if I update it, it will show up in the actual model. So you can do that for things like materials as well. You know, if we wanted to give it a material, say it's red, Control S, save the linked file, go back here, right click, reload, and now the materials will update. So that's just like a useful way of staying organized. You don't have to keep all your heavy models inside of one file, but I don't want this guy to be a floating head red mannequin. So I'm going to undo, Control Z, undo, Control S. And you can see that this is a pretty large file. This male mannequins file is 150 megabytes. So I don't want that level of data inside my other model. So save this, go back here, right click, reload, and that'll update back to what it originally was. This is a very useful menu Blender file. I like to use the materials tab often. So here are all the different materials that you have in the scene. Sometimes you can see duplicates. So I have this AIBS material, I have this mirror material, and when it has 0.001 or 0.002, that usually means Blender has overwritten a new material when you copy and paste and share things between files. So it's not always the case, but you know, I had some white materials that it looks like have been copied many times back and over. So you can actually consolidate these. If you select something, you can shift select to do multiple, right click and go to remap users. From the drop down menu, I can choose a material that I want to replace this material. So I've selected white 001 through 007, and I want to replace it all with the original white material. So select that, okay, same thing, white, okay. And now all of these materials have been replaced. So I shift select, right click, delete, and now I've kind of consolidated all my duplicate materials. Same thing like this. Let's take this mirror, shift D, duplicate it over to the side. Let's check our materials. This should just be white. But let's say this has the mirror material applied here. this has the mirror material applied here. I can change this to one of the duplicates. It looks like the mirror, right? But let's say I change the base color to something red, so it's like a red mirror. Let's say I have a bunch of instances throughout the model that I don't want that to happen. I can select this, right click, remap users, go to find mirror, my replacement material, select it, and that red turns back to the original mirror, and then I can get rid of this. So that's very useful for cleaning up your model. Next thing, for this particular model, I have a separate collection for merchandise, and I separated that for the floor and the wall. Those are all like kind of actual products, right? So this is t-shirts, this is hats, this is shoes. I consider this kind of an extra thing. It's a level of detail that is not essential to the architecture. And this is like hardware, mirrors, t-shirts, shoes, signage, visuals, things like that. Like the way that I linked these as a separate model, you know, I could do something like that for these. Like, let's say, for instance, I want to select all of this merchandise, Control C to copy. I'm going to open up a new Blender file. So here I'm just showing you how I link different files. This is just like a memory saving trick. A to select all, X to delete, Control V to paste these into the new model, M to put them into a new collection. I'm just going to say wall merchandise. Control S to save this model. I'm going to call the model wall merchandise. I'm going to go back here. I'm going to delete these from the scene. So if you look, this model is 91 megabytes. Control S, if I save it now, it's going to reduce. It's going to go down to 49.2 megabytes. So this is just a way to reduce the file size and kind of the heaviness of your file so that you're able to work quickly without a lot of lag. But let's say I want to bring that wall merchandise linked in as a separate model, just like these mannequins. Right now the cursor is over here. It's somewhere like way up above. I need it to be right here at the world origin. So Shift S brings up the cursor menu. 1 is going to bring the cursor to the world origin. Now I go to File, Link. I find that wall merchandise blend file, double click it. I go into collection and I set up that collection, wall merchandise, link. And now all those same mesh objects that were originally in this scene are now linked. They're a linked model. So I cannot tab into edit mode of this. I can't move things around in this model. It's a linked model, but you know, it makes sense because I was able to reduce the memory size by 50%. So now this is all the geometry. This is all the meshes in the scene. The next thing I usually do is set up lights. So I have a separate collection for lights. You can right click and select to isolate them to see all the different lights here. Another trick that I like to do is select a light and press Shift G. Shift G is the select grouped or select similar menu. And then if you go to type, since I selected a light object, it will select all the rest of those light objects in the scene. So that's one way of like filtering your selections. Alt Q to exit local view. In general, I keep my lighting pretty simple. These are all just area lights that are pretty small. They're 50 watts. They're shaped like a disc. I've turned off multiple importance. And in general, I place them somewhat realistically in relation to the light track objects. So these light tracks they normally have a light material. If I go to Asset Browser, I do have an LED material. Drag this in. So now I have a material called LED inside there, and then I'm going to put LED. They appear to be giving off light. In cycles, they actually are giving off light, but they're not lighting my scene. What I mean by that, if I turn off all my lights, the entire store looks dark. The lights are shining. If I crank this up to something very high, you can see it does illuminate the scene. I haven't done a test to see if this is actually a good way of doing things. I think it's better to use light objects than using emissive materials to light scenes. So I'm going to go back, drop this back down to 5, unhide my lights, and it's struggling to render. But you can see I've just set lights kind of close to where they exist in relation to the tracks. That's what's actually casting light in the scene. And then I have a series of lights that are aimed at the wall, and underneath these track lights, I have a series of lights like that. And so those are aiming, you're throwing light to hit the surfaces of the wall, and these center ones are illuminating the ground. I like to use multiple material slots. So, this object is one single object, but it has 2 material slots. If I wanted it to be white with a illuminated face, I can have a blank slot, which is going to show up as white, and a second material slot that I can apply to the faces of each of these letters. But that way I can quickly kind of assemble different materials. So if I wanted to make it a black sign with white, I could do that. If I wanted to do something different, I could create a new material, make it like red or something. It's a way to keep your materials cameras separate on each of your objects. Undo all that. And then the last thing that I've done is set up several cameras. So I keep my cameras on a separate layer. Similar thing, right click S, you can select all your cameras and isolate them in local view. You can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different cameras in here actually. Why I have so many cameras? In the video series that I made this, I did a series of still cameras, non-moving renderings, and then I did a series of panoramic cameras. So in this case, I actually do another technique that I've bound each of these cameras to a different frame in the timeline. So changing the shader editor over to the timeline, you can see I mentioned I have 9 cameras. So I have, let's go from 1 to 8 or 9. In the timeline, shift left is going to bring you all the way to the first frame. Shift right is going to bring you all the way to the end frame. And then left and right is going to go forward and back 1 frame at a time. And so you can see as I'm pressing left and changing the frame, the view is actually changing. So those are all different cameras. So if I were to press play, it's going to cycle through those cameras very quickly. We're not making an animation in which the camera slowly moves or an object slowly moves through the space, but it will render this scene on camera 1. Once that's done, it will move on to camera 2. Once that one is done, it will render camera 3, render camera 4, render camera 5, and you just have to press render animation. So that's a way of batch rendering. You have to specify a render output folder. So let's say I wanted to create a new folder. I'll just call it today's date, except my file format is PNG. My start and end is 1 to 9. If I wanted to render all 9 of these views, I would go render animation. So it will render this scene. Once it's done, it will output to that folder called 001. So that's first frame. And so it's outputted, it's saved that file as 0001. And you'll see that as it moves on to frame 2, it's doing the next view. When that saves, it's going to automatically save that as 0002. So there it goes, pops up 002, moves on to frame 3. I'm just going to escape this. I don't want to render all 9 of these. But you can also see that in material preview, all of these look like normal views. 4, 5. I know for a fact that when I get to frame 7, if I select the camera, go down to the camera's data properties, you can see that this is actually a panoramic camera. Go back to frame 6. This is a regular perspective camera with a focal length of 20 millimeters. Frame 7 is a panoramic camera of equirectangular type. What I mean by that, in case you haven't seen my other ones, it's a panoramic image. So if I change the aspect ratio to something that is 2 to 1, the width is 2 times the height, and then I go into rendered preview, you can see this interestingly unfolded, kind of unrolled panoramic image. You can map that to like 3D viewers, like I use Kula.co a lot for my kind of virtual walkthroughs, but you can create a 360 panoramic image using these. So I do that for frame 7. Frame 8 is just a different vantage point somewhere in the center. And then frame 9, this is closer to the back wall behind the cache wrap and everything. But you can upload those and create kind of a virtual tour. So let me see if I can find that real quick. Right, so in this case, I rendered 3 different cameras. 7, 8, 9, they created images that look like this, but when you map those onto a 360 environment, they look like this. So this is the first rendered image, but you can click and drag your cursor around as if you were looking around. And if you look at this on your phone, you can actually hold your phone up and like look around as if you were standing. So it's a pretty cool way of showing and representing a 3D space that I use a lot. You can see this one moves up a little bit in the space. You can look all the way back to the front. And the last one is way in the back, close to this back wall. But yeah, it's a little more immersive. You can kind of storytell as you walk through the space and see different vantage points. My compositing setup is pretty simple. I've enabled denoising data. So if you press this is going to be located under view layer, passes, data. There is one called denoising data. Noisy data is when it looks a little fuzzy, but if you denoise it, it's going to create a smoother image. Under your render layers, if you click that, you get these extra options. So denoising normal, albedo, and depth. There is a denoise node you can pass that information into, and then you put that into a glare node. Glare is like Eevee's loom. So objects that have light, you can see this 3D POV sign has a glow to it. In the final rendering, this glare node will give a fog glow to it. And then for this, I have it as a composite and a viewer. That's my entire compositing setup. It's not very complex. But yeah, I mean, this isn't a real project. I just did this for the sake of making some YouTube videos showing how to go through the process, which you can check out the link in the description for, how to import the CAD drawings, how to scale them, how to build the architecture, how to bring in the wall wall paneling, how to do lighting and cameras and rendering and all that. There's an entire playlist for that, but I just thought it'd be fun to, open up a model and show you how I set it up. It's kind of a working model. It's not really a final model, but yeah, hopefully it's useful. I think the really important thing to do is find out how to organize the collections, because that's really how you stay organized. Keep your cameras on a separate layer, keep your lights on a separate layer, keep your, various components of your architecture on different layers. So let's say I wanted to do an aerial view, I can hide the ceiling, and then I can hide the track lights. And now I can look into the store from a top view. So these are all my collections. One more thing that I forgot to go over in the shader editor. This is my environmental setup. So control spacebar again to maximize the window. I just add an environmental texture. This is an HDRI, and you can see I lower the strength so it's not overwhelming, and then it's not visible right now. It's all just showing a transparent background, but under render properties, if you go down to film, you can turn on and off transparent. And so now you can see the HDRI map that I'm using. So I like this one because it's an overcast sky. It's pretty neutral. There's not direct sunlight, but I don't like it having kind of washed out and being too overwhelmingly bright, but I do like to make it invisible. So again, film transparent will make that HDRI not show up in your actual renders. Anyways, hope this was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions. Like and subscribe for more content. I'm Andrew. This is my 3D POV, and thank you for watching.